All right, welcome to the next in the 67-day persuasion, closing, sales, all those important things you're going to need to get to the highest levels financially. And so today something is very important because I'm going to be giving you this fundamental principle that really the whole program is built around. I call that, by the way, the central thesis. We'll talk about that in a little bit later on, by the way, the concept of a central thesis. To be persuasive and to communicate messages, which really is what sales, persuasion, and closing is, and marketing for that matter, always build around a central thesis. So a lot of times, you know, and I'm kind of going off on a little side note here, a lot of times people will build businesses around little hooks like, oh, this is a cool name, and always build things around solid central theses. As that old proverb goes, you know, if you build your house on the sand, it'll stand for a while, but when the rain and the wind comes, it'll wash away. You got to build on the rock. And so there's a million courses out there on sales, persuasion, and so on, YouTube videos, little books. And the problem is, I believe, excuse me, the problem is that they're built on flawed central theses. Right? They're really built on the sand. So they'll work once in a while. They'll work occasionally. They'll make you some money. Your marketing, your sales, your closing. You'll do okay. But what's happened now is that science has progressed. We have better brain scanners. We have better knowledge. You know, if you read Social by Matt Lieberman, he talks about how there's these scanners that were never available 30 years ago. So books written 30 years ago, or, you know, a lot of these old school people who are still alive but are teaching their sales techniques that they developed 30 years ago, they work fairly well, but they're not as cutting edge as what you're learning right now. And it's not because I'm so smart or whatever, it's just I'm the recipient and you're going to be now the recipient of all this cutting edge science. And so I'm going to give you the central thesis in really one word, and I'll use maybe a fancy word: psychometrics. Okay? Another way to say psychometrics is personality types. That's kind of the layman's English. So these two words, which can be summed up in the one word, psychometrics, if you understand these, if you become a ninja, a wizard, a master of this, you will do 10 times better, maybe 100 times better than you would if you were following any other central thesis. So what are some of the other central theses that I've seen, sales and persuasion? Well, one of them, so this one I consider to be sound and solid based on not just my experience, but more importantly, what we know about the human brain. What's a technique that's not so fundamentally sound, building your sales, persuasion, and closing, you know, on the sand? Well, I would say one of it, without a doubt, is force of will. You know, a lot of people do their marketing and sales through force of will. You know, buy my stuff. There's this emotional mindset that I believe in it, so everyone else will. And you know what? You will sell some things with force of will. But your closing rate, I believe, will only be 25% of where it could be if you understood psychometrics and personality typing. Okay? Now remember, as we go through this whole program continues to break down this further, because then the personality types, you know, I'm developing my own system. There's 4 main personality types. Those 4 can break down into 12. Then within each of those, there's what's called the 25 cognitive biases, ways people make decisions. And so the way this all ties together, and I'll get to that in a second, is this uses science for personality types. There's different schools of thought, whether there's 8, 12, there's different forms. There's 25 cognitive biases. That plays on this. Okay, personality types. And this ignores all of that. It's just believe in what you sell, Be persistent. That's another one. You know, oh, don't give up until you have the deal closed. That doesn't work. Or if it works, I believe this works 25% of the time. And that's the max you could ever get to. If you had 100 people in a room and your strategy for sales, persuasion, and closing is how much you believe in it, your force of your emotions, you'll maximum close 25%. Persistence, maximum 20. This technique, you have the power. Now, I'm not promising this in actuality and practicality. You're never going to close 100%, or rarely. I wouldn't say never. There's ways you could close 100% of people. You could offer everybody who buys a $1,000 product from you, you'll give them a free Lamborghini. That's proof you get 100% closing rate. Okay? You wouldn't need force of will, persistence. In many ways, you wouldn't even need to understand personality types. But personality types would fit into that because personality types harness the cognitive biases. And one of the cognitive biases is reward. So Lamborghini is a very high reward, so people would all buy from you. Obviously, that's not going to work. You'll lose money that way. But I'm just going through all of these. Another one would be to be, this kind of very empathetic salesman. You see this in movies, somebody who really believes in. That's at most going to get you 25%. Another one would be very well practiced. You know what you're selling. You know every angle. You can explain every feature on your website and in your sales pitch. Again, max, practiced. And I could go on with 1,000 things that at best will be so-so for you to do your marketing, sales, and persuasion, but there's no reason to harp on what doesn't work. What does work? So let's expand on that. Well, what works, as I've talked about in some of the other lessons, is that humans are not homogeneous. And this is so important. I'm going to bring this up more than once. I get sick of hearing it, but then I know I've done my job because it's pounded into your head. People aren't the same. So anytime your strategy starts approaching the man with the hammer syndrome, so here's you, here's a hammer, okay? Anytime, this old saying, by the way, what that means is, to the man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So when you only have one tool in your tool belt, a hammer, you're going to try to hit everything. But not everything responds to being hit. A nail responds to being hit. That's how a nail works. You hit it with a hammer. A screw, if you put a screw on a piece of wood and you hit it with a hammer, you break the screw. So what must you do? You must draw on a different tool out of your tool belt. And that's the principle that nobody really talks about in sales and persuasion. It's completely forgotten. I've read the top books and know the people that do pitches for venture capital. Maybe you're wanting to raise investment capital, get investors. Maybe you want to make your website more persuasive. Sales copywriting. You write an amazing thing that people read it and they want to buy, whether it's a brochure. Maybe you want to come up with a brand. Whatever you're trying to do to persuade people, if you can understand this, that you can't just have a hammer, and the reason you can't is your audience, the people you're closing, persuading, people buying from you, your customers, they are at minimum composed of, let's say, here's 4 different, let's just use height. That's a good simple metaphor here. So, this is you and you're approaching them. You must at the minimum have 4 tools in your tool belt. This tall person will not respond to tool number 4. It'll only respond well to tool number 1. In actuality, in my experience, each personality type responds very well to one of the tools, so to another tool, not well at all to the third, and the 4th is a complete failure. So if today you're talking to that person, you got to have this tool belt composed of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you grab a tool out of it that matches that person. Now, as you become more advanced in marketing, you're going to figure out ways of modulation, which is a fancy word of saying to pull out multiple tools at one time. Try one tool on them, it doesn't work. Bring out another, and you're going to be able to move from tool to tool. Like Casanova said, the most persuasive man, the best sales and marketing guy ever, he said, to get what he wanted, he had to be able to be the chameleon, meaning he had to change tools. A chameleon sometimes has red skin on. That's it, because a chameleon hides. That's how it survives. So its tool to survival is being able to match. If they're in a green background, they turn green. Now, again, as I said, this isn't about you being a disingenuous, manipulative person. The chameleon's just an analogy. The point is, if you're in a room with a bunch of these people, you better adapt. And the way I look at it is, that's actually less selfish of an approach. You're saying, I want to meet people where they are in the ways that they think. Now, scientists have known this. You know, they talk about this. You might remember when you're a little kid, some humans are audio, some learn visually, and some learn kinesthetic. Other scientists, when they talk about, for example, romantic relationships, you have avoidance, you have secures, you have anxious. If you study the personality type system of the American Psychological Association, they define people by their neurosis. So the three they say, there's actually 12 types of neurosis and divided into three main categories, I believe. The first one is, you have people who are anxious, worriers, so to speak. You have people who are dramatic, and you have people who are eccentric/weird. Now that's a negative way of typing people, but that's fine. If you have the hexaco system, you have all these characteristics. You have Myers-Briggs. That breaks people into 16 types. Hexaco is similar, but you have strength finders. So you can see, we know that people are different. And therefore, the skill I want you to start to practice from today, from this lesson we're talking about right now, I want you to become a master of personality typing. Another way, like I said at the beginning of this lesson, a person who understands psychometrics. You walk into a room, you understand, oh, I'm talking to Susie. And I want you to start doing this. I don't want you to delineate between, okay, now I'm doing sales and marketing closing, and now getting coffee. To get good at this over these 67 days, it's kind of like a challenge. 67-day persuasion challenge. I want you to practice this everywhere you go. To practice it with your, waitress, waiter, someone you see at a store. Begin to read people, because, like Malcolm Gladwell says in his book, it takes a while. He talks about the 10,000 hour rule. It takes 10,000 hours, he said, to really master a skill. And make no mistake, this is a skill. Boy, if you could give me a company full of sales and marketing people who understood this, I would take that over any other skill. I would take that over somebody who's never used a computer before, who's never used Facebook, never done internet marketing, never done a TV or video campaign. All those things can be learned much quicker, or not much quicker. All those things are preferred for me. I'd rather teach them how to log into Facebook. And so in 67 days, or you're already in the program, however many days you have left, my goal for you is to be a personality type machine. Now, obviously you want to turn this off sometimes if you're married or something, or you don't always want to just be reading their personality type. It can get annoying with your closest friends. So practice it, and it's more important to even practice it on strangers. So the reason I've developed something that I'm going to show you now next is because all of these systems are relatively complicated. Myers-Briggs, you have ENTJ, INFJ, INTP, there's 16 types. It's a little complicated to remember. Hexaco, similar. Hexaco's pretty hard to remember. The neurosis, that's not really all-encompassing. This is more romance. This is more learning type. So I came up with my own system, that since you're in the program, I'm going to share with you that I find works the best, and you could start using today to get good at this reading of people. You know? And let me tell you a little story about this too. Okay, to preface this. There was a guy in my office, Justin. He worked for me. I was training him when I was working in finance, wealth management, all that stuff. And I said, his name was Justin. I said, Justin, he was working on a big deal with a guy out of New York. This is when I lived in North Carolina. And these deals we did had tremendous commissions. I mean, depending on the deal. But this deal, probably Justin was going to make anywhere, I can't remember, $50,000 for one deal, okay? So, of course, he wants the deal to close. He wants to be persuasive. He wants to do his job in sales. So he calls this guy, and I could hear, because I was, you know, kind of training Justin, and I could hear, I think it was speakerphone, I could hear the guy. It was an Italian guy, thick accent, kind of Brooklyn accent. Justin's from the South. He's very nice. And he's talking to this guy, and you could tell the guy was kind of dominating the conversation and telling Justin what to do. And Justin was from the South, so he's being hospitable, nice, kind. This guy's, deal didn't close. Justin hangs up the phone. And I remember telling Justin right at the beginning, I was like, you know what? That guy, you're going to have to be rough with that guy a little bit, a little more aggressive. Justin's like, what? You know, I wouldn't want someone to be rough with me. That's kind of how Justin was thinking as a nice person. Okay. A month later, he still hasn't closed his deal with this Italian guy. Justin's on the phone. I hear it. Same thing. Justin's being nice. This guy's, you know, being mean, or on the mean side. And it continues until about 6 months. Justin's desperately trying to close this deal. And I told Justin, I said, if you don't yell at that guy, you'll never get this deal. And he still didn't believe me. But after about a month of that, like 7 months in, I said, I heard Justin in the room. I wasn't even paying attention, just yelling at the guy, like, not calling him names, but basically like, look, dude, you know, you've been messing around with me. We're either going to do this deal or we're not. I don't have time for this. He was super aggressive. Within 24 hours, that deal was closed. Why? Because Justin, at that point, before, he learned this real quick. You'll learn this real quick, what I'm about to teach you, is he was treating that guy in a way that Justin had found to be an effective tool on other people. So Justin I've been kind to people who live in the South, Southern hospitality. Therefore, everybody in the world responds, and they don't. And they don't. And the sooner you get that out of your head and you start reading personality types, you're going to cut your closing rate from taking 6 months, like Justin. Justin could have closed that deal in 2 weeks, you know? And the longer you wait for deals, if you're trying to pitch for investment money, if you're trying to get more customers to buy from you, I've used this technique to build companies that have over 1 million customers, okay? That's not that easy to do. I've done it more than once, not because I'm so special, but because I made a simple framework in my head. So the simple framework that you should have, in my opinion, is understanding, and this is the most basic. We'll get more advanced, but you got to start with the pyramid. You got to build the foundation here. So the P type of personality, P, it's PASE, by the way. That's how you pronounce it, P-A-S-E. P stands for practical. And this is obviously a generalization of people, because nobody's just one letter in this. No one's just practical. But they're, you know, practical people with maybe secondarily social, action, emotional. So you have we're all a mixture. The P stands for that. The P stands for action-based person. S stands for social. Okay. The E stands for emotional. Again, every human, okay, has a dominant and a weak and a couple two that are in between. So for my personality type, I call myself an ape. Apes. Because my dominant is action, secondary is practical, tertiary, third is emotional, and least is social. Now let me define these, because these are not definitions that are exactly like what you grew up in a dictionary reading about. When I say practical, this one kind of means what you think it is. Practical is like down to earth, maybe a little slower speaking, logical, accountant type people, okay? Math people. Action is just like it sounds. Fast pace, you know, a little more like energetic. Let's go, let's make this happen. A little more aggressive. The A can also stand for aggressive. By the way, in that story with Justin and that Italian guy in New York, that guy, Italian guy, was action, and Justin was social, okay? So he wasn't speaking the guy's language, and Justin was also being emotional, which is a little bit nicer. So practical is kind of the logical, and we'll get into this more, don't worry. I'm just giving you a quick overview. Action is kind of fast-paced, aggressive. Social, now here's the definition of social, because all humans have to socialize, even the most introverted person, okay? But my definition of social, and you can find out if you're a social person in this definition, is if you just like to be around people for no reason, okay? Meaning, if you go to a restaurant to meet your friends and the friends don't show up, you'll just talk to anyone. If you're at a bar or at a table and there's 10 people around you, you just want to talk to everybody. You just like meeting people, okay? So for me, I socialize, but my dominant is not social, meaning I don't like to just have small talk with people I'll never see again, you know? So this is more this social butterfly, and we all know people like that. They just go to parties and chit-chat with everybody, and they just love it even if they're never going to see this person again. Oh, it's great to meet you. Oh, tell me about your kid. Like, that's the social. That's the socialite, socializer. And then emotional is that sensitive type of person. Now, just so you know, as I said at the beginning, each of us has these traits, all 4 of these, okay? But without a doubt, if you just go through your brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts and mom and dad and grandparents, there's definite differences. Some of them are a PACE, some of them are APES, some of them are SEAP, you know, some of them are PEAS. And so what I do now, and this is what I said you can start practicing. It's going to be very hard at the beginning because you're going to be confused and go, Ty, I can't remember what this is, and don't worry about it. There's an old saying with writing a book. They say to authors, they say the first draft is for the trash. What that means is, if you want to write a book or gain any new habit, you want to learn to speak Spanish, you want to learn to play the piano, you want to learn to open a business and be an entrepreneur, your first attempt doesn't need to be good, because what your first attempt is doing is creating mental momentum to just go out and get the ball rolling. And once the ball's rolling, you'll refine the skill over time. So what I want you to start doing, and the best way is to start with your own family, either who you're married to, well, step back, sorry. Start with yourself, okay? Reading yourself is a little harder. That's why I don't always say start with yourself. But if you're in this program, you're probably more self-aware than the average person. But we all overestimate who we are. So it's better to start, you know, you can start with your wife, husband, brother, sister, daughter, mother, father, and try to identify them, okay? Then, as you go about your day, and this gets a little trickier, when you meet someone and you haven't met them known them for very long, start trying to do this. And what happens is, remember, humans, I think there's a saying, I forget who said it was like Mark Twain or somebody said, you know, all humans are like the moon, they have their dark side, meaning people will not always reveal themselves to you. So sometimes, and especially emotional people, they're very sensitive, so they tend to come off as not emotional. In fact, that's one of the ways I know somebody is emotional. I'm like, you're sensitive, are you? If they say, no, I'm not sensitive, then they probably are. They're sensitive about being sensitive. It's like kind of ironic, okay? So when you're out at a coffee shop and you're reading somebody, don't always be fooled by the exterior facade. Sometimes you gotta look a little further, a little deeper in there, okay? But remember, the first draft's for the trash. Your first attempt at this is gonna be not very good, And 67 days from now, I bet you'll be a heck of a lot better if you stick to this. What's the reward for being good at this? Well, the reward is your potential closing rate, your potential persuasion powers go from 25%, because the average person can convince 25% of people to do stuff because that 25% of people is like them. But you'll be a superstar. Imagine the closing rate if you could quadruple it. Imagine if you had 4 times the customers now. Imagine if you had 4 times the amount of people interested in investing in you. Your life would instantly, overnight, no longer be the same. Whether it be the house you'd be living in, the cars you'd be driving, the extra money you'd have in the bank so you could sleep good at night, the extra millions of dollars you could invest in new things and charities and all this, that all predicates and hinges around those 4 letters. Okay? Now again, it's just like anything, we're going to get more and more advanced. But this fundamental, before I get into the advanced stuff, you got to start practicing this. Okay? Now, some of you, and I'll tell you, I can read, even though I can't see you, those of you who are practical, you're really struggling right now. You're like, wait, Ty, you're going to stop and expect me, with this little of explanation, you only gave me 15 or 30 minutes explanation, and you want me to go out, start reading strangers? I feel paralyzed. Like, I don't know enough. I know that because I know practical people, they sometimes need 40 hours of training in everything. But I want you to overcome that, and I want you to be able to switch modes and just be an action person, because all those of you watching who are action, they're like, Ty gave it an idea, if it's good enough, I'm just going to go out and try it. It's like a whirlwind. So if you're action-based, what I just asked you to do is very easy. If you're social, I like talking to people. These P and E are almost always slower to start something. So if you're a P and E, about 50% of people watching this will be P or E. You're a little freaked out right now because you don't feel like you know enough of this. That's okay. You'll survive. I want you to do it anyway, okay? I want you to go out because I don't want this to be head knowledge. The point of this program is not for you to pay money and just watch. It's gotta affect your life in every area for the positive. It's gotta make you more money, or why do it? So, what I want to do now, we'll continue on with the next lesson, tomorrow, whatever the next one gets released. I want you to do 3 things right now below this. Number 1, I want you to identify your best guess and we'll just keep it simple now. What's your dominant letter? Okay? I told you mine is action. That's why I'm more of an entrepreneur. That's why I get stuff, get the ball rolling. And we'll go over there's downsides of each of these personality types, their strengths or weaknesses, but keeping it simple now. So, A is my dominant. So, what is your dominant? Leave that here. And why do you think it's your dominant? Like, I'll give you the reason I think my dominant is action. Most of my life, I get an idea. Within a month, it's rocking and rolling. Now, sometimes that's bad because I start it without planning it enough. But I've never really struggled with being paralyzed. Like, because we all know people that are like, I've had this great idea for 5 years, but I just can't seem to get it off the ground. Like, I'm action-based, so that's never really a problem, okay? It has other downsides, by the way. So that's my reasoning. When I was 5, I thought of a tomato stand. I had it up in a day, okay? I've always been that. So that's my reason if I was answering below. What's your reason why your dominant is this? All right, second question below to answer to complete this lesson. What is your weakest and why? Okay, I said my weakest is S. I'm an APES. Social. If I go somewhere, I'm traveling and I'm alone for whatever reason, I don't tend to do a lot of small talk with people. And if I do, it's, if they're interesting or something, maybe I will. So I'm not a social butterfly. My mom's more of a social butterfly. One of my friends is a social butterfly. Herman, we used to own nightclubs together. he would just go talk to everybody. You know, my thing was like, I stick to the people I know, and I like deeper relationships with less people. But for him, it was like the more the merrier. So for me, I think my weakest is because using feedback analysis, like Peter Drucker talks about in the past, I just never been a social butterfly. I do socialize, and I have social skills, and I can throw, you know, I throw huge parties at my house, 500 people come, and I go out in Hollywood and talk, but it's usually, there's a reason I'm going out, you know? So if I go out, I want to talk to that person because we could do a business deal together, or you know, there's a reason. I had the owner of the Laugh Factory was here today for lunch. Jamie Masada, famous guy here in Hollywood, owns all these big comedy clubs. You know, launched with Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy and Johnny Carson and Chris D'Elia, all these guys, and I like socializing with him. I'm not awkward socializing because, and he's kind of like me. We're working on a project together. So that's my reason. What's your reason? What's your letter that's your weakest? It doesn't come the easiest. All right? Then the third thing I want you to answer below is pick one of your brothers or sisters. If you don't have a brother or sister, pick a cousin or something. Okay? What are they? What's their strength and what's their weakness? So I'll just pick one of my brothers. Ben, he's my youngest brother. So Ben, I believe, is his strongest is action, and I think his weakest probably practical. He's getting better at it because you can refine yourself, but just his natural personality type, he's a little bit like me. He's like on the go. I can get him. He gets excited about stuff. Practical. He doesn't always follow through. He's not really a math person, you know. That wasn't his thing in school. He wasn't like logic is not his exact. So, what's yours, brother or sister? You can put their first name below, strength, weakness, and a quick explanation. This is an invaluable skill. I'm telling you, this is the keys to the kingdom of being persuasive. Okay? So, answer those three, and I will see you. Once you answer those, it'll unlock for the next day or whatever the next lesson. So I'll see you there.